Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to wait just a minute or two for more neighbors to filter in on this beautiful election day, and then we'll go ahead and get started in the next minute or two. All right, Val, if you go to the next slide, I'll run through some of the quick housekeeping while we wait for other people to join on. So hi, for those who don't know me, I'm Abby Ellis. I am the Director of Advocacy and Communications at UCSF. Formerly was the Associate Director of Community Relations and have been working on the new hospital project over the past several months. So I've been a face at these past few meetings, but welcome to those who are new. Just a reminder, some Zoom housekeeping suggestions, though I know we're all very familiar with Zoom at this point in time. This meeting is being recorded and will be available online afterwards for those who aren't able to make it and for anyone who wants to go back and review any of the content that we discussed. There's going to be 2 points for questions and discussion during this presentation. One will be after Richard Kennedy from Field Operations pauses after his overview of the new hospital landscape design to ask him any questions about that. And then we're going to move into a section about our efforts to green the Parnassus Heights area, where we're going to have some breakout rooms. So opportunities for UCF staff and neighbors to have a smaller group conversation about some areas of opportunity. Next slide, please. All right, and so as I mentioned, here's a brief agenda. We're going to get an update on the new hospital from Elizabeth Pollock and Stuart Ekblad, who you all are very familiar with. They've been spending their time with us over the past year or so to share the new hospital design and get your feedback and incorporate that in this iterative process. Next, we'll be hearing from Joy Glazier, who is on our campus planning team with UCSF to talk about the Parnassus Avenue streetscape. So part of the holistic vision for how we are looking at the Parnassus Heights campus and tying the whole street together. As I mentioned, Richard Kennedy from Field Operations will be talking about the new hospital landscape design. We will pause there to take questions on anything that we just discussed. The way that we'll do that is by raising your virtual hand. So if you could click the reactions button down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the raise hand feature. Then we're going to go into the Greening Parnassus Heights conversation with Ellie Rossiter on our community relations team, and then have a breakout group discussion around those, her presentation. Next slide, please. All right, and as a reminder, our community meeting agreements to help make this process as effective and cohesive as possible. We ask one person, one microphone to take space and make space. We are listening to understand and acknowledging that no one knows everything, but together that we know a lot. And if you have any suggestions for community meeting agreements or things that we should touch on, please feel free to send them to me either in the chat or to my email address listed on the slide here. Next slide, please. Great. So with that, I will hand it over to Elizabeth.
Great. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see everyone virtually again. Next slide, please. So most people understand at this point why we are intent on building the hospital at Parnassus, but just for anyone who might be new, it really focuses on a number of really key issues that we've been facing. So the hospital is required to address critical seismic deficiencies, capacity problems, and patient care issues. We are in a buildings that are old. Moffitt was built in 1955. The facilities are outdated and inflexible and undersized. Moffitt does not meet the seismic legislation requirements that are due in 2030. And we really need to shift our focus and invest in the Parnassus campus in the way that we had been investing in Mission Bay over the last 20 years. That's really key for us to be able to actually meet our mission of ongoing recruitment and retention. So hopefully that's all clear at this point. We've kind of gone over this a number of times. Our hospital is really undersized, and we've been dealing with record census highs, even amidst, during, and after the pandemic. We are unable to accept all the patients that are wanting to come to our facility. So being able to meet that demand and the growth that we anticipate is really critical. Next slide. I'm going to pass it to Stuart for this one.
Hi, good evening. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of the key points. Most of you have seen this slide, but there are a couple things that are new to it in terms of certainly in terms of where we are. I think it's clear we've gone through the master planning and we are clearly into the design, and we're moving into more detailed design. For those that not aware, we did get a Regents approval basically here in May in the span of May 17th, May 19th. So we are now moving forward with into the full design, and our next big step, that'll be through 24, where we actually complete the detailed design. But we also starting to be moving when we can to for the demolition of LPPI, when that'll be in 2023. And full construction again in 23, 29. But there are some, which it doesn't show really on this slide, but there will be some early, what we're going to call starts of some testing of soils and other things that'll be starting to move forward with now as we prepare for construction and prepare for the demolition. And then finally, to finish a hospital after construction and then to open it takes quite a bit of time, almost a year really, to fit it up and do the commissioning and make sure everything's operational for the first patient in 2030. And then after that, we will be doing the renovation. Where we are with the process. Again, right now we are focused and so move forward. So with that, I'll turn it back to Elizabeth.
Right, if you could go to the next slide, please. These are the topics that we've covered in the previous community design meetings that we've held with all of you. So we really iterated and talked about each of these a couple of different times, but the building design in particular, the exterior and the massing of the building, sort of the aesthetic, how the building connects with nature, the way that it presents itself in connection with Mount Sutro, and the pedestrian and vehicular circulation. Also, we've talked a little bit about public spaces, the all-day eatery, the connection from park to peak, and we are beginning feedback about the actual impacts of construction. As Stuart mentioned, we've started some what we call site and make ready work already, and that work will be picking up as we move forward. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So this really signals sort of a shift in terms of the topics that we would be engaging with the community about. So as we move to the latter phases of design, we move away from the exterior of the building and really focus on the interior design. And so the input that we need from patient, staff, and providers, so that we can make that space really work for people, is where we'll be focusing. Also focusing on the getting input about the greening of Parnassus Heights, and we'll spend a lot of time during this meeting talking about that. So we're shifting our communication a bit. We're going to provide regular construction and project updates on the new hospital website. We're moving to include the Experience Parnassus, which was our engagement that we did in person at the alumni house, faculty alumni house. We're moving that to an AR, VR, augmented reality, and virtual reality that will ultimately be able to be done online, though. Through a QR code, people will be able to scan that QR code with their phone and be able to get a sort of a real-time update about how the design is progressing. And we will also have on that website a tool to continue to get any input, suggestions, or questions from the community. A big focus, of course, though, will be the quarterly construction meetings, and that's really the opportunity to understand what's happening in the in the immediate area during the upcoming quarter. So I think the last one was in May, and the next one will be in August. And that's sort of, in general, the way that we anticipate continuing our opportunities to engage with the community. I think that's it.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. And Joy?
Great. Good evening, everyone. I would like to give kind of a overview of the larger Parnassus Avenue streetscape plan. So next slide. So the Parnassus Avenue streetscape study was created to redefine Parnassus Avenue as it passes through the UCSF campus in a way that creates a safe and functional street and a high quality public space, and one which projects a distinct identity for UCSF. So this study was completed in early 2016, and at that time we held many discussions with the community at community meetings. We also worked very closely with the city throughout the process. Components of the streetscape design include things like enhanced pedestrian crossings for safety, plazas, consolidated shuttle and muni stops, flexible use parking lane, enhanced social spaces with furnishings, bulb outs or sidewalk extensions, enhanced planting areas to beautify the street and capture stormwater, bicycle parking and lighting. Next slide. So we have a funding plan and a phasing plan for the entire length of Parnassus Avenue at UCSF. So to orient you, north is up, on the left is Fifth Avenue, and on the right is Hillway and Medical Center Way. The first phase in yellow has been completed, and that's at our Clinical Sciences building. And then you can see the other 4 phases which make up the remainder of the streetscape, will be constructed to be complete by 2032. Next slide. And here are some photos of the first phase that was completed last year with the renovation of Clinical Sciences building. On the upper left, you'll see the main entrance to the building with seating and an overhang for shelter, and a change of paving that indicates where the entrances are. We call these our doormats. Going clockwise in the upper middle photo is an area of increased planting and some additional seating. This also shows one of the new street trees, which is a primrose tree and will be consistent along the length of the street. The upper right is at the center of the building, and we have visitor bicycle parking. This is already very heavily utilized. The lower right shows the UCSF shuttle stop, and that's in a pullout where 3 shuttles can line up. The lower middle shows one of our stormwater rain gardens that help accommodate the stormwater from the site to meet city requirements. And the bottom left shows the variations of paving and another view of that doormat. And altogether, this stretch of the streetscape is safe and functional and attractive and highly planted, provides ample seating for those with mobility issues or just wanting a place to sit, as well as bicycle parking to support those arriving by bicycles. And the idea is that this will be a consistent look and feel for both sides of Parnassus Avenue here at the UCSF campus. So from here, with that overview, I'm going to pass it on to Richard Kennedy.
Thank you, Joy. And thank you everyone for joining this evening. I'll be talking through some updates to the landscape and exterior public spaces of the hospital that we've been developing over the past few months. Next slide, please. And the landscape elements in many ways are the clearest expression of what is really the guiding design theme of the project, this notion of healing habitat. And the healing habitat idea is largely about creating a therapeutic and positive experience as possible for patients, staff, and visitors to the hospital as we can, making the full design of the hospital something that contributes to a sense of wellness, contributes to speed of recovery, and just overall feelings of comfort throughout the entire hospital environment. But it also applies to the way the hospital expresses itself in the city and in the neighborhood. And so the idea of bringing in landscape into the expression of the design and into its overall configuration as a building is a way to demonstrate that visibly and physically. And so this axonometric here is showing the notion of the middle portion of the hospital volume being inset to create a large public garden that is really the focal point of the hospital and the public experience. But it also suggests this notion that Mount Sutro is coming into the hospital in a way. So seen from afar, the hospital creates a nod of recognition to its immediate surroundings and the backdrop of Mount Sutro. And you can also begin to see the streetscape, which is the ground level expression of nature and this concept of healing habitat. Next slide, please. This is a slightly different version of that same idea. This is a section cut through the hospital with Parnassus on the left-hand side of the screen, and Mount Sutro would be behind the hospital on the right-hand side of the screen. And what this is simply doing is cutting through the hospital so that you can see that landscape is nestled into several elevations, several floors of the hospital. We are trying to place landscape in as many what we call nooks and crannies as we can, so that visitors, patients, staff throughout the hospital can get glimpses of nature during the workday or during their stay at the hospital. And so I'm going to walk through more or less starting from the lower levels of Parnassus and the streetscape, going up to the nestled gardens of the courtyard at level 8 and level 10, and then concluding with Sutro Terrace, which is the main public garden facing Parnassus with views to the whole horizon. Next slide, please. Starting with the streetscape, we are looking for the streetscape. Even though this is public and connected to the overall campus and to the city, we do think the streetscape is a point of arrival where this notion of healing habitat and creating a sense of tranquility begins. And so we are looking to create a place that is beautiful for the public passing by, but for visitors and patients to the hospital, that once they step into the drop-off experience, there is a sense of comfort, of tranquility, of greenery, and of nature. Next slide. And so we're looking along the lines of what Julia was just describing, of pavement treatments and coordination with Muni, coordination with bike racks and circulation. We're doing all of that, but making sure that we are creating as much greenery as we can to soften the whole expression of the hospital, and again, to create the sense of calmness, so that when you're arriving at the hospital, you feel a step apart, as if you are in a more tranquil and more comfortable setting. And so we do this, and this is an overall site plan of the ground level with Parnassus at the top of the page. We're running a continuous line of street trees consistent with what's happening in front of the Clinical Sciences building. But we're also adding another layer of greenery just inside of the street line, and that creates this additional layer of landscape, or additional threshold of landscape. What you see in this plan too, going from left to right, is a valet service drop-off on the left-hand side, the main drop-off for the hospital at the very center of the drop-offs, right in front of the public lobby. And then on the right-hand side is the emergency department drop-off. And so there's a main exit off of Parnassus, a loop that connects all three of those drop-offs, and then an exit at Hillway with the traffic signal on the right-hand side. Next slide. And all of the configurations where we're tightening up the drive aisles to make them narrow, adding greenery, creating the radii and turns is all about creating as safe a pedestrian experience as possible, so that pedestrians are able to move intuitively into the public lobby entryway and comfortably. Next slide, please. This is an elevation if you were standing on the other side of Parnassus looking towards the hospital and towards Mount Sutro. And you can see the double layer of greenery created by the street tree line, as well as the layer of landscape beyond that. Again, trying to create two layers effectively of greenery that helps to buffer views in and soften the expression of the hospital from the outside. And next slide, please. When you're at the drop-off, you have the additional layer of planting that helps to create that buffer. It's a visual buffer to screen off buses and cars idling and so on. It also creates wind protection, just trying to create as comfortable an experience as possible while also adding beauty of the greenery and landscape. And all of the treatments would be consistent with what's happening from the clinical sciences building to start bridging the full length of Parnassus, so that over time it feels consistent, coherent. Next slide, please. I'm going to move up now to the interior elevated gardens of the interior courtyard, what are at level 8 and level 10 within the hospital, just seen there in the middle of this slide. Next slide, please. This landscape here is a quiet area of reflection. This would be accessible to patients, families, visitors and staff to the hospital itself. It's accessible off of the visitor core. And what it's largely doing is providing, on the one hand, access for staff and patients and their families to get a quiet moment of reflection outdoors, access to greenery, to fresh air, to natural sunlight, but also for patients, staff, and visitors of Moffitt Hospital and Long, that they too can have a view of greenery, and not just a new building, but actually trees, canopy, and the seasonal change that a garden can provide. So it's meant to create views towards greenery for the full perimeter of buildings and hospital rooms looking into the courtyard space. Next slide. It's designed simply as an open room with seating that's oriented to the western sun and the sky over Moffitt and Long Hospital, but separated in such a way that it creates privacy for people using this space, all surrounded by greenery to create a buffer and a sense of intimacy. Next slide, please. It will be visible as soon as you step off the visitor elevator core for all levels above level 8. You'll step out and the canopy trees rising up will create a sense of surprise and hopefully delight, given it's unexpected to be so high in a building and still seeing such a vivid expression of nature and greenery. Next slide, please. Within the garden, again, it's meant to be open and intuitive to navigate, but still having intimate spaces, so visitors can have a quiet moment of reflection, staff can have a quiet moment during their break, or patients and their families can have just a private and intimate moment separate from the rest of the activity of the hospital. Next slide, please. And the last view of the elevated garden here is from the Long Hospital, just reiterating that we're trying to add this experience to patients in the existing hospitals and to elevate and enrich the experience of looking out from those floors. Next slide, please. I'm going to conclude with Sutro Terrace, which is the primary expression of the healing habitat in the project. It is the primary public landscape of the hospital and connected to the all-day eatery. And so this is meant to be, again, an expression of an exposure to nature for anyone visiting the hospital at eye level and space to be inside a garden. But from afar, it's also meant to soften the overall expression of the building to tie it to the horizon of Mount Sutro around the corner, and to just really demonstrate that nature is a major part of the healing experience that the hospital is providing. Next slide, please. This is an overall site plan. You can see how the Sutro Terrace wraps from the northwest on the upper left, all the way across the frontage along Parnassus at the top of the slide, and then along the entire east frontage that faces Mount Sutro. So it really will create that visual connection as if Mount Sutro is extended into the hospital. Next slide. The design itself is quite simple. We're creating a meander through a woodland garden. So the pathways meander in and around planting and in and around a series of architectural columns that are holding up the volume. And the columns themselves also become in some ways an expression of a woodland. They read like large tree trunks that just adds to the sense of being inside of a woodland. What you can see in this plan are several areas of dining where loose tables and chairs are spread on the west side to the left of the plan, in the nooks on the top of the plan there, at the top of the slide, and even on the east side with views towards downtown. And at the corners, we have overlooks that will really offer the spectacular views on the east side to downtown, out to the full horizon of to the northeast. And on the west, you can see Golden Gate Park, the Golden Gate Bridge, and even the Pacific Ocean from this elevation. Next slide. This is a rendering of the primary expression of the garden, pathways that meander through rich planting, trees coming out of the gardens to create that woodland effect, and the columns themselves planted with climbing vines just to create the illusion of additional tree canopy, and quite, I think, a poetic expression of how architecture and the garden are coming together. Next slide, please. Level 6 and the Sutro Terrace are connected to the all-day eateries. The all-day eatery is a public food area, so with open to the public and fully visible to and open to the frontage of Sutro Terrace. So the garden provides that backdrop for dining and meeting within the all-day eatery, but it makes, I think, a great pairing of the food and public offering of the eatery and the natural expression and views of the city within Sutro Terrace. Next slide, please. And so on days where the wind is calm and the day is beautiful, the dining would spill out into those areas of dining around the full perimeter of the roof, offering the possibility of having a meal outside, enjoying the scenery and the view. Next slide, please. Pathways narrow and vary to create different positions of orientation. So as you walk around the garden, you're oriented to different points on the horizon. In this case, pointing out to the northeast, where you'll have a panorama of the full horizon of downtown and Alcatraz out to the north. Next slide, please. And just another image of the sense of meander, where there's many different places of varying scales to navigate across the garden. So you're able to stroll rather along the full length of the rooftop, but also pause and have a quiet moment where you can step aside, have a quiet moment of reflection, and look out and enjoy the full panorama of the city and the horizon. Next slide, please. So with all of the streetscape, the level 8 garden and the Sutro Terrace garden, they're all meant to create different moments of exposure and access to greenery, to soften the whole experience and hopefully enrich how everyone experiences and understands the hospital experience as something that is more comfortable than the traditional experience. From your first sense of arrival, the wellness journey begins and carries all the way through your whole time and experience at the hospital itself. Thank you very much. We're happy to take questions on anything you've seen and discuss anything you'd like to add.
Great. Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Joy and Stuart and Elizabeth for presenting as well. So just a reminder, we're taking questions by raising your virtual hand as Robert has done. You can do that by clicking the reactions button down at the bottom of your screen. So Robert, please ask your question.
Hi, I think it's visually stunning, the design, and I really love the healing habitat theme. And I hope that you're extending that out into our ecology, the theme of healing, also our ecology, which the food web has been broken and destroyed by landscape architects bringing in a lot of exotic plants that our wildlife has not evolved with and cannot use. So I hope you're considering planting lots of native plants, especially plants from local origin that our birds, butterflies, and bees and insects have evolved with. Do you intend to do that? Thank you.
Well, certainly, I think your point is well taken. I think landscape has the capacity to contribute to the ecological and biodiversity characteristics of a city, but species are key to doing so. And given the environment and climate of Parnassus, we are going to be reliant on largely native species. The weather, the wind, the salt air, the amount of sunlight, given that this is a north-facing garden, are all challenging conditions. And so native species are much more suited to that specific environment than any other species. And so largely we are going to rely on species that are adapted to this place. They will do more successfully over time. So our commitment is to do largely a native as much as possible for a variety of reasons, some of what you've described, but also simply from practical purposes of being sustainable here in this place. But given the challenges, we will also consider species that are suited to this climate, that are climate ready. They're from different areas of the world that have the same climate as the Bay Area, or the same climate as to where the Bay Area is evolving. But any of those species would be done carefully and selected carefully, rather, with the full landscape maintenance team of UCSF, other horticultural advisors from around the city, experts who are navigating these sensitive issues about species, like in the Presidio, just to make sure that we're making careful decisions about anything that deviates from the native palette. And rather than be a detriment to the ecology, is a benefit. It adds to the pollinator offering that the city I think desperately needs. So all done very, very carefully and largely native as much as we can, just given the practical challenges of creating a garden in this site.
Great. Thanks, Richard. So the next question is from Susan. Susan, do you want to go ahead?
Unmuted. Well, Robert, I appreciate your question. And I guess besides the Presidio, I would suggest that there may be some consultation with the people who worked on the Salesforce Tower Park, because they've got lots of different gardens, and that's been in place for 2 or 3 years now. And it's quite lovely with, yours is not trying to do this, but they've got different habitats, and you might, even though it's downtown, you might be able to learn from them. One other comment, I really like the double planting in front of the hospital. I think that really will be a real positive thing, particularly because I assume you can zigzag them so that you don't have like a clear view right through from the street to the hospital. It's sort of a model view. I have 2 questions. One, what is the current thinking about the roof overhang of the hospital over the sidewalk at that ground level? That's one question. Because in the environment, the EIR and stuff, you were talking about different amounts of overhang over the sidewalk and working with the city on that. What's the current thinking on that?
Well, I can answer a piece of that, and as the landscape architect on the team, but I might look to others from the UCSF team to answer anything about the building architecture itself and as to the EIR. I mean, the expression of the overhang is to create a kind of weather protected space for the drop off, where the lobby is inset to allow for all the circulation drop off to happen under cover. And so we're kind of carving into the building in many ways to create that space. It's not exposed to all the wind and weather. The landscape that I was showing in the view, the streetscape and the street line of trees is all outboard of that overhang. That second line of landscape is just underneath it. It's just at the beyond the lip of the rooftop. But the streetscape is outside of it, and the hospital landscape is trying to extend that greenery in to create that extra level of greenery, of buffer, and of habitat.
Okay. And then my second question, you may not be able to answer this because this goes back to the sidewalk plan. I noticed that the sidewalk plan for Parnassus in front of the Research and Academic Building is scheduled sort of in the next couple of years. And I'm just curious how that's aligning with the planned construction, demolition and construction of the Research and Academic Building. Are those consistent? Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the timing, since I was surprised that that sidewalk was, earlier on.
Yeah, Kevin, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so Susan, this is Kevin Beauchamp. Are you
Yeah.
referring to the timing and the consistency of the design or something else?
I was referring mainly to the timing, because it looked like, it was just flashed up there that sidewalk redo was, 2024, 25. And I'm assuming that the Research and Academic Building construction is starting at the same time. I just didn't know about that coordination.
Yeah, so in terms of the sequencing of buildings and their sidewalk frontage, typically the sidewalk frontage happens last because you don't want to mess it up during construction of the building. The Parnassus Research and Academic Building has a much shorter construction timeframe than the hospital does. And so because it will start construction towards the latter part of next year, and will take a couple of years to finish, that section of Parnassus Avenue will be completed before the section in front of the hospital will be completed.
Okay, I didn't realize that the Research and Academic Building was going to go up so quickly.
Right,
Okay.
and yeah, and as you heard earlier, we will be transitioning to community meetings specifically about that, later this year in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Peter, I see your hand is raised.
So is that Branston?
Yes, Peter
Okay.
Branston.
Hi, thank you. I'm curious, how much of the hospital is subterranean, if any? Is it just come up, straight from ground level, or is there, functionality below ground or below grade or parking?
Yeah, Elizabeth, could I hand that to you?
Sure. We have one basement level that is at the same level as our current basement. That is operational. It will have like sterile processing in it, lines with the same level where radiation oncology is currently. And I believe we have a smaller sub basement that I am less knowledgeable about, that maybe has some tanks in it, but is a much smaller footprint. And that's it. There is not any subterranean parking or anything else below those two levels.
And one other question. Do you have to excavate into the hill in order to build the hospital? I mean, there's not enough of a flat.
The hill meaning Mount Sutro?
Yeah.
So no, not to build the hospital. There is a what we covered last month. Again, anyone from UCSF can jump in about the tanks that require some excavation into Mount Sutro, but not for the hospital itself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Jean, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. I've missed a couple of meetings, so you may have covered this. So I'm a remedial question asker. What are you doing on the hill on the east side of Medical Way that will face the hospital? There's been a lot of work getting rid of dead wood and stuff back there. And so I'm just wondering what your overall plans are to tie it all together.
There has been work along in Mount Sutro per the vegetation management plan, which is the tree removal that you're mentioning there. That's not related to the new hospital development. But as Elizabeth mentioned at our last meeting, we shared an update on plans that we also talked about in July of last year to have medical gas tanks that will be into Mount Sutro, just right at Medical Center Way there. So depending on which area of the forest you're talking about, that's one of those two. But the medical gas tanks work hasn't started yet, so you wouldn't be seeing any signs or indication of that yet. Julio?
Thank you. The building looks beautiful. My question has to do with a couple of legacy things in Parnassus. There's a couple of statues. There's a statue of Hippocrates in front of the Student Union. And there's also a statue of Hygeia that has been sort of tucked in between Langley Porter and the hospital and the emergency room, sort of hidden away. I wonder, is that statue going to be saved or somehow incorporated into the building?
That is a great question. I don't know the answer. Kevin, do you know the answer to that?
Well, I can say that the Hippocrates statue, which is across the street from the hospital, is not going to be affected by this project. Regarding the second that you mentioned, yeah, I'm not familiar with the plans for that, but if it's on the site, I'm sure we'll need a plan. Elizabeth, do you have anything to add?
Nothing substantial. It's a great point, Leo. Thank you for bringing it up, and let's take that as a follow-up.
I hope you can save it. Thank you.
That
Yes.
sounds like we have some homework. Thanks. All right, I don't see any other hands raised at this point. Are there any other? Oh, Walter, I spoke too soon. Go ahead.
The university made a commitment in the 1970s to maintain Sutro Forest. Until recently, they had an abysmal record of not following through on its commitments. Of the last few years, suddenly, as they're going to build a new hospital, they've paid attention to the maintenance and restoration of Sutro Forest. You've given a presentation of the whole concept of healing and landscaping and greening of the site. My question is, what sort of commitment has UC made for the present and the future to actually build out as they present, and then to maintain well into the future what it is they purport to be committed to create as landscaping and healing spaces?
Yeah, Elizabeth or Richard, so Walter, if I could understand, just repeat your question back to you, is what is our plan to maintain Sutro Terrace and the landscaping that we're planning as part of the new hospital? I don't know if Elizabeth or Richard, if you have an answer.
Was that the question, Walter? So
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's going to be a significant commitment and cost in perpetuity. And is that actually a commitment and something that's built into the long-term operation of the new facility?
as we understand it, Richard has provided us the estimate that it will take at least 2 FTEs, Richard, right, to maintain the landscaping plan, and that is being folded into what would be additional operating costs for the future of the new hospital.
Thanks.
Right. I think it's a great point. I mean, landscapes are not like buildings in that they are not perfect on day one. They come to life over many years, and that requires care and a commitment over the long term. And so maintenance is one of the themes that we continually discuss as we talk about design. We propose ideas, we propose species and plant densities, and then we discuss the implications on maintenance. But just given the scale of this, the landscape elements of the hospital, as Elizabeth has mentioned, there will need dedicated staff. This can't just simply be another campus landscape. It has a certain amount of complexity, and given that it's nestled in the building, logistics are very specific. And so we're seeing it along those lines, that it will have designated care. The maintenance requirements, the maintenance processes will continue to advance and become more specific, just in parallel with the design, as the design continues to evolve. A great point. It's certainly a necessary consideration in designing successful landscapes.
Perfect. Thank you. So Jim, you will be our last question. We have another section of our presentation we'll get to.
Okay. So I have a preliminary question first. I may have missed it, but is Sutro Terrace open to the public, or is it limited to people who have been admitted or people who've been through security and are part of being in the hospital?
It's going to be open to the public, but there will probably be some sort of security element, but you don't have to be associated with a patient or somebody in the hospital.
Okay, so my point is that I noticed actually fairly limited opportunities for sitting in the meandering aisle of the terrace, and given that sunlight is going to be so scarce there, there will be a lot of need to want to sit exactly where the sun happens to be at the moment that you're on the terrace. And so we'll be picking up sunlight from the east and from the west at very sharp angles. And so I would encourage a design that is very flexible on where people could be seated, even if it means, I mean, you've got the risk of people lying down and sleeping. But you know, I understand there's this trade-off between a lot of comfortable places to sit and your responsibilities of being in a pretty public space. But the catching the sunlight, my experience of being on campus, catching the sunlight where it happens to be is crucial to the enjoyment of being outdoors.
Fully and absolutely agree with that. And some of that can be studied and predicted in the modeling of the project. You know, we know, for example, that the eastern side that faces downtown in Sutro has the morning light, and the western portion that faces Parnassus and the Moffitt Hospital has afternoon and early and dusk light. And so we are positioning seating accordingly. So we can predict some of that through our modeling. But then there's another layer of flexibility. And so we have both in the current plan. We have fixed benches that are tied to the planter edges that you may have seen in the renderings. But we also have movable tables and chairs that are part of the dining program that can be moved to the most opportune spaces if a patch of sunlight emerges while you're out there. So we predict as much as we can and design for that, but also have the layer of flexibility that allows people to co-opt the space in a way to be entrepreneurial about the sunlight.
I'm on mute. Thank you. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ellie.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Ellie Rossiter, and I am the Executive Director of Community Relations and Strategic Partnerships I really appreciate everybody taking their time this evening to join us. So we can go to the next slide. So if we zoom back here for a minute and look at the whole street again, as Joy did. As we have discussed this evening, there are sort of two bookend projects. One is the new hospital on the east side of the street. And then one is the research and academic building, or what we call the PRAB, on the west side of the street. And these projects really have guiding design principles, which were established in the comprehensive Parnassus Heights plan. And that includes this idea of park to peak, or the Golden Gate Park to the Sutro peak. And then also this idea of a healing habitat, which Richard so nicely outlined. And so what we're talking about tonight really directly sort of relates to these design principles, and that the idea is that these principles extend beyond the hospital and they go out to the street. And so where we will be greening the Parnassus Avenue. And if we want to go to the next slide. Now, in order to do this construction at both of these sites, the new hospital and the research and academic building, we are going to have to remove 28 street trees that are currently on Parnassus. The Parnassus Heights building requires that we take a couple trees down, and then also the new hospital as well. So San Francisco, as many of you know, has a one-to-one replacement requirement of trees. Whatever comes down needs to be replaced. And UCSF is going to be doubling this requirement with a 2-to-1 ratio. And so we think that this 2-to-1 goal will help us accomplish multiple goals, including the greening of Parnassus, as well as access to greenery throughout the neighborhood. So we're not talking about shrubbery and small bushes. We're talking about trees. And so if we go to the next slide, first I'm going to do a little bit of math. As I mentioned, we are removing a total of 33 trees along Parnassus Avenue. We have a goal of 2-to-1 commitment for which takes us to 66 trees. We're only replacing 24 of those trees along Parnassus. And so we have 42 additional street trees that we want to plant in the surrounding neighborhood. And we want your feedback to help us decide where to put them. And so hopefully that's clear. We're talking about trees, not shrubbery here. So these are in addition to what we are going to be planting along Parnassus Avenue. We have additional trees, almost double the number, to place inside of the neighborhood. So if you can go to the next slide, I know I'm moving quickly, but there's a reason for that. We came up with 4 possible options where those trees could go. We could green the connection between Parnassus and Coal Valley. We could green the connection between Parnassus and the Inner Sunset. We could also extend the park to, we could green additional avenues from Park to Peak between Golden Gate Park and Mount Sutro. And we could also cover up or screen the parking garage on Hillway Avenue. So these are options right now that we've explored. And if we go to the next, you can see a little bit of a sort of a rendering of what this might look like. So this is sort of the options for greening the connection to Coal Valley going toward the east. And then the next slide, these would be, that would be Carl or Cole Street. And then, or I said, wait, Irving or Judah. This one, this is Irving or Judah going to the Inner Sunset, so going west. Next slide. Or a number of different avenues that take us from Golden Gate Park up to the campus. That includes Arguello, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th. And then the final option that we looked at is Hillway Avenue, the very steep street that goes from campus on down. And there's a parking garage on the west side of that street. having additional trees there would sort of provide a screen to that garage. And if you go to the next slide, you can see all 4 options on one slide. And again, I'm moving quickly because I really want to get to the part where we ask for your feedback. So if you go to the next slide, what we're going to do tonight is to break out into groups. And I'm really happy to see that we've already received a lot of comments tonight. So you're all very engaged and we need your additional thoughts. We want to get you to help us think of places for these additional 42 trees. And we're going to break out in a second into a number of different discussion groups about that. But before we do that, I wanted to just give you a sense of the timeline here. So what we're doing tonight is we're introducing the idea of greening Parnassus and what the streetscape is going to look like. After we have a discussion in smaller groups, we are going to send a survey of these options to the broader neighborhood. So people who live nearby will get a survey from us by the end of this month. And then that survey will close and we hope to get responses by the end of July. We're going to come back together again in September, where we will share the survey results, and that those survey results will inform the RFP that we send out for organizations to help us plant those trees. And then we hope to plant those trees at the end of the year. And so with that, I wanted to, is there any more slides? I don't think so. But I see there is a question. Oh yeah, these are the questions we are going to be considering in our breakout group. So we want to know from you, what do you think of the proposed locations that we came up with? Are there other locations for you to consider? And then in addition to mailing a postcard and sending an email, how should we share that survey? How should we get the input from the neighbors in the area? So these are the things that we want to discuss with you in our smaller breakout. Abby, before we go to the smaller breakouts, do we have time for the one question?
Yeah, we do.
Great.
Walter, ask your question.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you green them all? Why are you committed and
Well, that
limited
could be
only
an
to
option. There are
24
42 trees. Oh, sorry.
Why are you limited to so few trees? This is a huge, huge project and a huge, huge new footprint that you're putting on the community. Certainly you can afford to plant more than 42 trees.
Well, thank you for
You
that
can't
suggestion.
do all this greening.
That is exactly the kind of thing we want to hear from everybody in this next set of discussions. So Cynthia, I see your hand is up. I think if it's okay, if their question isn't about the process, then I think it might make sense to go into the smaller groups and start having these kinds of discussions with more people, and unless anyone disagrees with that. So I guess first I'll just see if there are any questions about this process that I've outlined. And if there are no questions about the process, then I think what we'll do is take your questions, ideas, thoughts, suggestions in the small breakout to encourage more discussion.
Great.
And there will be one of each of us in each of these breakout groups. And so we're going to try like mad to capture your comments by writing them down. And hopefully we'll have time at the end of the breakouts to come back and sort of share some of the comments that were made in the small breakouts. So I think we get to 10 minutes or something like that in the breakouts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So if we start now about 15 minutes, and then that gives us about 10 minutes afterwards to have a report out.
And Cynthia, hold your question. I do definitely want to hear it, but I think it just might generate other people's thoughts and ideas as well if you share it in the discussion group.
All right, so I will open up the breakout rooms.
Great. See everybody back here in a few minutes to report out.
Breakout room.
Oh, and I'm not sure, someone's in on the phone. Last digits are 059. Is that somebody I should assign? Or are they just calling in on the phone? If you don't mind unmuting, I can put you in a room, or if you're associated with a video, I can do that too. If you're talking, whomever's on the phone with the last three digits, 059, you are on mute, so I'm not able to move you.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Oh, there you go.
Is that correct? Hi.
Hi, are you calling in for a, oh wait, Tammy, is that you?
Yes, I got put in the wrong room. I was with Alicia and
Well,
Christine.
I am David Hecht. My name is Pat, and I don't know where I am right now. Am I in a breakout room or where am I?
No, you are in the main room. You are David Hecht. Okay, so I will move you.
Thank you, but I don't have my microphone turned on my computer.
Got it,
so
got it.
I'm
Okay,
calling
I'll
it.
put you in the right
Thank you.
room with your video.
Thank
Merge
you.
you back together.
Yeah.
All
Tammy.
right. So I don't know where Kevin is. So let me,
Oh,
yes.
we ended up.
You wanted to put me with Kevin. Okay.
I did,
Okay.
but Kevin's,
Sound good.
whatchamacallit, his package arrived.
Okay.
So he doesn't need you, but if you want to be in Kevin's room, you can, I can move you.
No, it's okay. Maybe I'll have a bite of dinner while no one's watching
Yeah, okay.
and hang
sounds
out in this
good.
room. All right.
Okay, and then Julio, it looks like you are not joined your room. And then Richard, I wasn't sure if you wanted to be in a room or not, or if you wanted to sort of float around. I mean, I'm open to your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, I'm interested to hear maybe the feedback. We can, when everyone comes together and there's a report out, I can float until then.
Okay.
It's just a 10-minute session.
Yeah, about 10-15. We are going to end at 7:30. So my hope is to pull people back at the latest at 7:15 or so. Yeah, so if you want to just bounce around, I can put you in room
Or
one.
if he's a host, he can bounce around on his own. You can choose which.
But I'm not a host.
You are not. Kyle, could you make Richard a co-host, or does he need to be the host to be able to bounce around?
Co-host should do it for Richard, you said?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Then you can do your own bouncing.
Yeah.
All right.
Have fun.
Time travel. See. Hey.
Did that do it for you, Richard?
It did. Thank you. No, just showed up.
And then Kyle, could you move Julio to a room? He's supposed to be in room 3.
Julio is supposed to be in room 3. Julio is, help me out, where?
So it's saying that.
Oh, I see Julio's in, not joined in room 3.
Yeah.
That's just a matter of they haven't probably clicked the joined button. Are you seeing something from them though?
No. Julio, do you see the join button?
Yes, sorry, where's the join button?
Let me see if I can move to, yeah, it's got you in room 3. Let me see.
Oh, I got it.
See it? Great.
Perfect. All right. So now it is just us.
The 4 of us.
Val, I didn't put you anywhere. If you want to go in a room, you're also more than welcome to not. Tammy's going to eat dinner. Kyle.
I'm doing what Tammy's doing. I'm trying to eat down something too.
Great. Okay. Then I'm planning on just staying here to help moderate in case anybody jumps out or has issues. So
Yeah, and I'm happy to assist where I'm at. I don't know if it's helpful for me to give you back the host permissions, but I'm happy to do whatever is useful.
yeah, it seems like this is fine.
Cool. Yep, that works for me too.
Yeah. So
As long as
hopefully,
you don't mind delegating and dictating, I am absolutely good with that.
no, I don't mind putting people, I mean, hopefully they all stay in their rooms.
I have a 5-year-old over here who would, if there any.
Zoom recording. All right, people should be coming back now. I always feel like I have all the power when I'm able to summon people back to me. Looks like room 2 is having a great conversation because none of them have chosen to come back yet. We're gonna have to drag them away in 23 seconds. And also room 4. Well, I hope you all had a good chat, had some good, interesting insight. Alicia, you're on mute.
We had a great conversation. We had a star in our group. We had a little bit of trouble with the proportion of people in our breakout room, but it's okay. Robert carried the day.
You had too many people, Alicia, or?
We had only one person who was giving comment because others were either with the university or we had Jen Lowe from our supervisor's office. So she was performing a listening role.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
But that's okay. We had a great conversation anyway.
Good.
Good. Great. So I think everyone is back now. So the next part, Val, will you pull up the slides, please? Perfect. So we just want to have a report out, which actually we don't really need the slide for. I just really like the graphics. I think it's so breakout room 1 for Alicia. Do you want to start first? Do you have anything that you want to share about your and Robert's discussion?
Well, Robert has some great ideas and he said that he felt comfortable speaking for himself. So Robert.
Perfect.
Top line. I want to connect corridors. I like this option C the best because to me it brought portions of the park and Keys-Our Triangle up toward the hospital and on up to Sutro. So that's what I'm looking to do, and because I'm working with the San Francisco Estuary Institute on building wildlife corridors throughout the city and trying to heal the environment that way, allowing animals to move around. We're working on Sunset Boulevard right now, and we're seeing a lot more biodiversity as a result of planting native plants. So I hope when you consider the trees, you consider adding native trees, but also building a little ecology underneath it by removing cement as much as you can, building green retention wells for the water to drain, and for perennials, grasses, and shrubs to grow as well, and make it more of like a little ecosystem on its own. I'm also concerned with lighting. I'd like all the lighting to be directed down and motion activated if possible. And I'd like the any kind of windows to be non-reflective so the birds don't get dazzled by the light or attracted to reflections of the forest and bang into the glass. So those are my concerns. Thanks for hearing me out.
Yeah, and so those lighting and window ones are for the new hospital design, I'm hearing. And
exactly.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. All right. Room 2, Joy or Elizabeth, do you want to share?
Yeah, I can share. We had some preference for the connecting Golden Gate Park to UCSF, so that's the Park to Peak, and then also one for connecting to Inner Sunset. There was some advocating for planting more trees, and then there were some good things that we should keep in mind. One is maintenance over time, and the other is making sure to consult with property owners because some people might not want trees And I think these are things we've been thinking of, but it was good things to keep in mind.
Great. Thank you. Room 3, Kevin or Diane, can I put you on the spot?
Sure, I can start. So we had 3 neighbors in our group, and there was, let's see, in terms of locations, there was support for the avenues between the campus and Golden Gate Park for Park to Peak. We also heard that focusing on the Coal Valley area makes sense because that section of the neighborhood is in closest proximity to the hospital and would be in the shadow of the building. And so it makes sense to try to think about that nexus. But there was also the sentiment that if there are streets that are in the neighborhood that are nearby that aren't on our map, we shouldn't limit ourselves to just, the streets that were shown in green as options. And so I think that was some of the feedback that was received. Oh, and also support for screening the parking garage along Hillway. So I think, there were plenty of options there. In terms of ways to outreach, I think it was expressed that it was important that we do the mailings, especially for older individuals who may not be checking their email. And also the thought that, really reaching out to the community in person, perhaps at the farmers market in the parking lot near 7th would be a good idea. And so I think those were the high points. But anyone else in group who would like to add anything, please raise your hand. But I think that was the top line summary.
Great. Perfect. Okay. Ellie, will you give us a little report from room 4?
Sure. Hi, everyone. In case you wanted to know what Cynthia had her hand up before we broke out, she had some concern about wind and really sees trees as a way to reduce wind and wanted to know sort of what we are doing to mitigate that. So I'd love to be able to get back to her on that. And that got a conversation going about wind and sort of what other things are being done around wind. In terms of the trees, there was some preference by one member of the group on the sort of to think about whether we go even further into the inner Sunset, especially because the shuttle goes down there, and could we get as far down as 7th Street? There was some ideas expressed around how to reach neighbors through Facebook groups. Let's see, and then a lot of appreciation for the overall design and the way that the community is been engaged through these meetings.
Great. Thank you, Ellie. So with that, we have about 5 minutes left of our meeting. Val, do you mind pulling up the slide that had the next steps, just so we can remind people of the timing for this before we close out? I want to thank everyone for participating and sharing their thoughts on our proposal, and we look forward to working with you. Val? If not, I also know off the top of my head, which is that we will be, it's fine.
Can you give me the next steps? I'm sorry, I don't know which slide that one is.
Fine. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
So our next steps after this meeting, we're going to launch this survey based on your feedback, make any final edits. We'll send it out via the postcard and the email list like we usually do. But great suggestions for some farmers market outreach. Maybe we'll do some flyering in the neighborhood to really make sure we're helping to spread the word and get as many neighbors involved in the survey as we can. And hopefully some of you will help to share it on those Facebook groups or other areas with other neighbors that you think might be interested in taking it. We hope to have that survey run over the summer, probably ending in July. So people have 6 weeks or so to take it, depending on when we're able to get it out. And then our next meeting on this topic will be in September. So we'll share the survey results. We'll discuss our steps for getting a third-party community organization to come do the planting and work with us in identifying specific locations, the trees that we're going to plant, all in line with the city's process. And then we'll move forward from there. And just to note that we're appreciative of all of your time and effort tonight. So thank you so much. Ellie, do you have anything you want to add?
No, just thanks to everyone for being here tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Have a good night.